Good morning, friends. Welcome to the History Static Lecture Series for Prelims 2018. And in this lecture, we will be starting with the Gandhian phase. We'll be starting first with the Lucknow Pact, and then we'll move into the non-cooperation movement, the developments between non-cooperation movement and the civil disobedience movement, and we will continue till the Pune Pact. So in the next lecture, we will try to wrap up the independence movement till independence, and then we will go to the personalities and the governance and stuff. So as we know that in 1906, Muslim League was formed in Dhaka, and it was formed out of partition of Bengal because many Nawabs and many landed interest in the Muslim class, they were feeling that Congress, because they dubbed kind of Congress as a Hindu party, therefore they wanted a party which should safeguard the interests of Muslims. So Muslim League was formed with three intentions. Firstly, to preach loyalty towards the British, because as we know that after 1857 revolt, the British, they started to look towards Muslims with suspicion because they thought that they are the main force behind that revolt. Therefore, a section of Muslims thought that we will have to preach our loyalty towards British so that a faith could be developed among British towards Muslims, and we could have a pro-Muslim policies from the British. Second thing they preached was to safeguard the economic and political interests of Muslims. And thirdly, to enhance communal unity in India. So the third objective looks surprising, but during this phase, at least till 1937 or 1938, the Muslim League was following what we call as soft communalism. Because now we have in India, we have this soft Hindutva and hard Hindutva, where many people allege that Congress is following soft Hindutva and BJP is following hard Hindutva. In the same way, during the independence movement, the Muslim League became crazy, or what you call as they became very, very hard communalists only after 1937 elections. Before that, they were following the policy of soft communalism. It had an element of secularism, it had an element of communalism, so it was what you call as soft communalism. So in 1900, so when this organization was formed, the British liked it because they thought that this could be a bulwark against rising tide of Congress in India, because they thought that Congress is the enemy number one, because they tried to preach disloyalty towards the British Empire. Therefore, they kind of started pampering or appeasing this Muslim League, and Muslim League demanded separate electorates for the Muslims, which was given by the Morley Minto Act. So when we will discuss the constitutional development in India, we will be discussing in detail about Morley Minto Act and other acts of the British. So in 1916, Gandhi had arrived in India, but he was not involved in politics. And in 1916, between 1906 and 1916, there was a downslide in the national movement in India, because after the Surat split, hardly any movement was going on at the national level. Bal Gangadhar Tilak was also out of jail, and he rejoined the Congress. And at that time, the leadership of Muslim League was also in the hands of nationalists. So there are people like Ali Brother, there were people like Maulana Azad, Jinnah. All of them wanted, or all of them were nationalists of highest order, and they wanted, to have a unity with the Congress. So they started having talks with the Congress for a common agenda, because in 1915 the Secretary of State in India, he had told the Indian leaders at that time that we want your loyalty for the World War One, and in return we will be more than happy to take suggestions for you on what constitutional reforms you want. Therefore, it gave an opportunity to the nationalists across the political parties to use this opportunity to have a common demand against the British. So therefore, there was a leader at that time which became the father of Indian communalism, Jinnah. And at that time, Jinnah was a very fierce nationalist. He was a secularist. He was the member of both Muslim League and the INC. And his political gurus were Gokhale and Tilak. So this is a commonality between Jinnah and Gandhi, because even Gandhi's political guru was Gokhale. So he had very high respect of Gokhale and Tilak, and he was the main architect behind this agreement which took place between Congress and the Muslim League. So the League leaders and the Congress leaders, they had talked with each other in the Calcutta session, and finally they signed a Lucknow Pact in 1916, because in Lucknow both the Muslim League session and the Congress session held together for the first time, and therefore they signed this Lucknow Pact. And what were the main or key components or key demands or the united demands of INC and the Muslim League? So these were following. So firstly, both of them demanded self-government in India. Now there's a difference between self-government and Purna Swaraj. Self-government did not mean abolition of British rule. It meant government within the empire. So they kind of demanded the model which was adopted in Australia, Canada and New Zealand, where they had self-government but the Queen was the head of the state. Secondly, they demanded abolition of India Council. They also demanded that salaries of Secretary of State for Indian Affairs should be paid from British coffers and it should not be paid from Indian coffers. So the salary or all the expense of the Secretary of State office in Britain was done from Indian revenue, and that was one of the key component of the drain which we talked in the earlier lectures. Fourthly, both of them accepted separate electorate. So this was one of the most significant announcement of this pact, because Congress till that time was opposing separate electorate, because they thought that this would go against, this would see that the interest of Hindus and the Muslims are not common, which went against the idea of the INC, which was mostly a secular party. Also, they demanded that half of the members of Imperial Legislative Council should be Indians. So this was a pact which was criticized later by many nationalists, because they thought that with Congress accepting separate electorate, it went to the spree of appeasement of Muslim League, and also Muslim League was not a big entity by that time, and with the recognition of demand of Muslim League, it gave much political weight to the Muslim League, and Muslim League then after that, after this pact, they started to consider themselves as a representative of Muslims of all India, right? So it did the same mistake which Chamberlain and the English PM did to Hitler in 1930s, because communism, whether soft or hard, it's always dangerous. You have to curb it at its onset, because if you will not curb this will become a monster in few years, which happened in India, and in the next 2 or 3 decades, this soft communism transformed into very extreme communism. Now let's start with the Gandhian phase. So what were the factors behind rise of Gandhi in Indian politics? So firstly, at that time when Gandhi arrived in India, the Indian national movement was directionless at that time. There had been no activity going on since 7 or 8 years. Many youths, many congressmen were impatient that what are we doing? We are doing nothing. We are neither hitting the streets, we are neither doing any kind of stuff. So the national movement was directionless. Secondly, there was leadership vacuum. All these moderate leaders had become old by that time, and their health was not good. Extremist leaders were either they retired from politics or they were in jail. So there was this leadership vacuum. Thirdly, Gandhi, when he arrived in India, he was already a big name because of his successes in South Africa. So, it's not that somebody come to India and nobody knew him. He was a popular leader before his arrival in India, because through newspapers and press, people in India were hearing his activities and his courage in South Africa. Fourthly, there are a number of socio-economic circumstances which were also responsible for rise of Gandhi, because during the World War I, there was phenomenal increase in debt, because government spent a lot on defense, and to meet the debt, government increases the taxes. And since permanent settlement means that they could not increase taxes from there, therefore they increased taxes on commercial activities, which adversely affected the traders. And also, since people, because of these taxes, there was rise in inflation, and because of rise in inflation, the middle class and the common masses, they were also having a very bad time at that time. Also, the growth of industry during the war period meant that there is a new class which is called as labor, which emerged, and the laborers were also very much hard hit by this inflation. In case of agriculture also, things were not very good, because there was because of focus on commercial crops, there was shortage of food grains, and it led to famines. It led to continuous famines after every year. Therefore, the peasants were also very angry. So initially, when Gandhi came to India, he first toured India for 2 years, and then he launched his 3 important satyagrahas: the Champaran Satyagraha, the Kheda Satyagraha, and the Ahmedabad mill strike. So in all these small movements, Gandhi achieved success, and that made people accept Gandhi as the leader of the Indian national movement. So first was the Champaran Satyagraha. So Gandhi, in Champaran, what happened was that in 19th century, indigo was a major export from India. But indigo, after the discovery of synthetic German dye, the demand of indigo felt very low in the international demand or international market. So the Britishers told the farmers that okay, now that indigo is not demanded in the world, you if you want to grow any other crop, you can grow, but you have to give us a compensation for this. I mean, you have to give us high rent or high revenue for any other crop which you grow, because we are telling you that don't grow indigo, okay, but you will have to compensate us for our loss through paying us higher taxes or higher revenue, right? This thing continued till the World War One. But what happened in World War One, since Germany was fighting against the Allied forces, which include Britain and everything, so therefore the flow or the import of synthetic German dye stopped, right? And therefore again the demand arose for the indigo, and therefore this tin khatiya system was born. And what would this tin khatiya system mean? It meant that the farmer will have to grow indigo in at least 3 by 20% of his land, and the planters again force the farmers to grow indigo. And as I've discussed earlier, that when indigo is grown in any land, it becomes unfertile or infertile for growing any other crop. So they force the farmers to grow indigo in minimum percentage of their land, and they also force them to sell the indigo to the planters for cheap, right? So Rajkumar Shukla, you have to remember the name because they could ask Rajkumar Shukla is associated with which of the following. Rajkumar Shukla went to Gandhi and he went to Gandhiji with a request to see or to work towards the emancipation of farmers in the Champaran district. And Gandhiji first sent these young chaps like Rajendra Prasad and others to first investigate this situation, and then he went to Champaran. When he went to Champaran, he was stopped by the British. But later on, when he asked, why are you stopping me? Well, this is my own country, and I should have freedom to go anywhere. So then they allowed Gandhiji to investigate the matter. And then after investigation, when he went to the farmers, he understood the condition. The British thought that we have to appease Gandhiji, otherwise it could turn into a big mass movement. Therefore, the Europeans established a committee to look into the issue, and Gandhiji was made a member of that committee. And when Gandhiji was made the member of committee, the committee recommended abolition of the system, and it also recommended that the planters cannot force the farmers to grow indigo. It also recommended that all the extra money or illegal money which is appropriated by the planters from the farmers, they will have to be paid back. But the planters, they kind of force the government to dilute the recommendation. Therefore, the committee recommended that the planters will have to pay at least 20% of or 25% of the illegal cess or illegal kind of amount which they have appropriated from the farmers. So this was a compromise between the planters and the farmers. Ultimately, within a decade, all the planters left the area, and this area was free from this exploitation. This was the first success of Mahatma Gandhi. Next is Kheda Satyagraha. So this could be called, Kheda Satyagraha could be called as the first non-cooperation movement. So there was a rule which said that if the rainfall is below 25%, sorry, not the rainfall, the production due to lack of rain is below 25% of the average, then in that year land revenue will be remitted, which means there will be no land revenue which will be taken from the farmers. So the farmers in Kheda were demanding the same exemption because they believe that this year the average production was less than 25%, right? But the British were not accepting this, and they were trying to, I mean, the farmers which refused to pay the land revenue, they tried to confiscate their land, they tried to confiscate their animals, and therefore Gandhiji first sent Sardar Patel and Indulal Yagnik, you have to remember the name, Indulal Yagnik and Sardar Patel, to look into the matter. Then Gandhiji also arrived, and Gandhiji asked the peasant to non-cooperate with the government and withhold the revenue. Ultimately, with pressure from the Gandhiji and other nationalists, the British did not accept it in open that we are remitting the order, but it secretly told the officials that only those individuals or only those farmers who have capacity to pay, only they should pay the land revenue, rest should not pay the land revenue, which ultimately meant that nobody paid the land revenue. Next is the Ahmedabad mill strike. This was the first hunger strike of the Gandhi in India. So there was a dispute between the mill owners of Ahmedabad and the laborers on the issue of bonus. So the sister of the Ahmedabad mill owner was also with the workers. She also demanded from her brother that he should meet the demands of the workers. So the workers were demanding 50% bonus, while the mill owner was only, or he was only agreeing with 20% bonus. Ultimately, Gandhiji came to the scene. He sat at a hunger strike against the mill owners, and he told the workers that you should not accept the offer given by the owner. Ultimately, because the mill owner was also the friend of Gandhiji, so naturally when he sat on hunger strike, it would have an adverse effect on him also. And finally, as a compromise, he accepted on giving 35% bonus, which Gandhiji told the workers to accept, and finally this movement or the strike was over. Next is the Rowlatt Bill or the Rowlatt Satyagraha. So Rowlatt Bill there were two bills which the government wanted to pass through the legislation, and all the Indian members of the council, they were against the bill. But even governor using his special veto, they passed the bill with disregarding the opinion of the Indian members and the Indian nationalists. So the bill had two provisions. Firstly, this act authorized the government to imprison for maximum of 2 years without trial any person who government feel is promoting terrorism, or if government feels that, or government has a suspicion that in future he could promote the terrorism. So that was a draconian bill, because you can just arrest anybody you don't like, because you don't have to prove it. If the government has the suspicion that Mr. A can support terrorism or Mr. A is aiding terrorism, without proof he could be sent to jail or he could be kept in jail for 2 years. So this was naturally something which was very much against democratic spirits, and nationalists and the Indian members of the council naturally did not like it, and therefore, and even after the home rule movement, by that time home rule movement got almost over, so the cadre which became politicized in the home rule movement, they were also impatient and they were eager to join the protest against this act. So Gandhiji also gave a call of nationwide hartal against this act. But however, the hartal turned violent, and therefore Gandhiji, being the a person who only believed in non-violence, he took back the movement. So what is the significance of the movement? So as a political campaign, this was the first failure of Gandhiji in India, because it failed to achieve its only objective, which was to repeal this act. Also, the act or this satyagraha was limited to few cities, and only educated class principally participated in the satyagraha. So this satyagraha finally realized Gandhiji the importance of the Congress organization, because this in this satyagraha, the Congress did not play a major role, and therefore Gandhiji realized that without this organization, my impact would be limited, because in the earlier three satyagrahas, the Congress organization played a very important role. Also, it led to melting of any goodwill which Government of India 1919 Act could have created. So even the moderates, they were also, because the government had this thing that government would give some constitutional reforms and that would make the moderates happy. But with this persecution and with this draconian law, even the moderates did not, or the faith of moderates in the British sense of fair play and justice, diluted considerably. So 1990 Act could not satisfy anyone, any of the sections of the national movement. Next is the Jallianwala Bagh incident. So the situation in Punjab was alarming, as there were riots and protests against the Rowlatt Act. Therefore, in Punjab, there was this Lieutenant Governor, Michael O. Dwyer, not to be confused with Brigadier Dyer. He was the one who gave the order of shooting. Michael O'Dwyer was the Lieutenant Governor of the Punjab state. So he imposed martial law in Punjab because he believed that the situation in Punjab is not very fine, because people were anguished with this Rowlatt Act and there were protests going on in each and every area. And the martial law declared that not more than 4 persons can be assembled anywhere or at any public place. So a protest meeting or a crowd of non-violent protesters, they sat in Jallianwala Bagh on the occasion of Baisakhi. And therefore, they were demanding repeal of Rowlatt Act and they were demanding the end of martial law. Ultimately, General Dyer he took this meeting as an violation of the martial law, and without giving any further notice, without even informing the protesters that if you don't disperse, I will give the orders of shooting, he entered through this narrow lane, he closed all the gates, and he ordered shooting. And in this shooting, there were children, women, old age people, all of them died, many of them, almost every of them died. The official figure was somewhere around 380 people. In reality, around 1500 people died. Now, the acts of Dyer was shameful in itself, but what was more shameful was that the kind of support he got in England. So, Rudyard Kipling, the famous novelist who wrote this book called Jungle Book, he wrote an article saying or praising Dyer as a man who saved India. Many of the other, leaders or other Democrats in Britain, they started collecting funds for him to kind of honor him. Right? So, and they were not neo-Nazi people. They were people who were considered as democratic, who were considered as liberal. Even they started celebrating his act. So, there was this Hunter Commission which was established to look into the excesses or to look into the acts of Dyer. And this Hunter Commission, though it kind of said that what Dyer did was not right, but it did not penalize him in any circumstances. When Dyer went to England, he was given £26,000 by the civil society members in Britain for the act of bravery which he did in Jallianwala Bagh. 26,000 people or 26,000 pounds, if we convert into the modern or to the PPP of 2018, it amounts to around 15 crore rupees. So he got a significant sum of money from the people in Britain. But in India, this act actually opened the eyes of all, not just moderates, nationalists, the pro-British people also. So even Rabindranath Tagore, who could not be considered as a very anti-British person, he also gave back his knighthood. So he was called as Sir before, he gave up his knighthood. Gandhiji gave up his Kasare-Hind. This was the award he was given by the Britain for his support to the English during the Boer War when he was in South Africa. So Gandhiji, also there are phases in Gandhi's life. Gandhiji started as a guy who had full faith in the British sense of play and justice. What he was demanding in South Africa was, equal rights as a citizen of the Britain. He was not demanding the abolition of the rule. He became anti-British when he started to evolve more. His life is a lesson for us that he was not born as great. He became great with time. He realized his mistakes, he changed him. So therefore, a lot of people would surprise that why would he support Boer War, but at that time he was a believer in the fair play and efficiency of the British rule. Next we have is non-cooperation movement. So non-cooperation movement was started in 1920 by Gandhiji. And before we discuss non-cooperation movement, let us discuss the Khilafat movement also, because they went parallelly and they were almost together. So during the World War I, what happened? During the World War I, the Germans and the Turks and the Bulgarians, they were allies against England, Italy, Russia and France. And naturally, when World War One, all these countries got defeated. So the Ottoman Empire, or most of the territories of Ottoman Empire, was taken away by the victors. Now, the head of Ottoman Empire was not just a ruler; he was also the religious head of Sunni Muslims. He was what we call as caliph, right? Therefore, when the caliph was mistreated and his territories was put under the control of, because his territory was in Syria, Palestine, Israel, Iraq, Jordan, all these territories were taken by him, and they were placed under a French or British sovereignty. So it hurted the feelings, or it adversely hurted the feelings of Indian Muslims, and therefore they were very angry, because by that time, as you know, that Muslim League, when it was started, it was a pro-British organization, and it propagated Muslims to show loyalty towards the British rule. But this act made the Muslims, or at least the educated Muslims, very anti-British. And Gandhiji, being a shrewd politician, he realized that this is an opportunity which he should take, and he should use this issue to bring Muslims into the Indian national movement. That was because he knew that without the support of Muslims, Indian national movement will not, or it will always, its depth or its strength will always be limited, right? Therefore, he kind of thought that this opportunity could be used to bring back, or to increase Hindu-Muslim unity, and to bring the Muslims into the national movement. Therefore, Gandhi supported the Khilafat cause. Khilafat leaders in return, they knew that if Gandhiji would support them, that would make their voice very, audible towards the British, because they knew that Gandhi by that time had become, or had emerged into a national leader. So therefore, they also chose Gandhiji as the president of the Khilafat committee. Now, at the same time, Gandhiji was also planning to launch the non-cooperation movement, and there were many factors which forced Gandhiji to launch this non-cooperation movement. So firstly, there was resentment at the British after the war. Because the national movement, the nationalists, supported Britain in the war efforts, in a hope that after the war, India would become, or there will be self-government which will be appointed in India. But the British, after the war, they kind of completely ignored the demands of nationalists. Therefore, they were anguished and angry. Secondly, economic hardships due to World War One. So naturally, we have discussed earlier how prices have grown up, how there was an increase in taxes, how there was shortage of essential commodities. All of them made the life of masses miserable. Thirdly, the Rowlatt Act and the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. So this completely abolished any goodwill which could emerge between Indians and the British. Fourthly, Khilafat movement. So this also increased the hope of Gandhiji that with this movement, if he now launches non-cooperation movement, he would get the support of Muslims also, and this would strengthen the backbone of the movement. So let us now discuss the key features of the movement. By the way, for factual information, in Nagpur, This movement was launched in Nagpur. So first of all, the movement of key features of what you call as nature. First of all, it was a peaceful and a non-violent movement. Secondly, Gandhiji demanded Indians to relinquish all their titles and resign from the nominated seats in local bodies as a mark of protest. Also, Gandhiji asked all the people to withdraw their children from the government control or aided schools and colleges. So on this a question could be asked in the exam, that which of the following were the features of the non-cooperation movement. Four statements could be asked and you'll have to discuss which of them are right. Fourthly, people were asked to boycott foreign goods. Fifthly, people were asked to boycott the elections of the Legislative Council. Sixthly, the Indian National Congress demanded Swaraj or self-government. Now, what is Swaraj? This government does not, or this Gandhiji did not define. This is why he was very shrewd. He left the word undefined. So the extremists thought that Swaraj is Poon Swaraj. The moderates thought that it's a dominion status. That is why all of them supported Gandhiji. So that is why he was, when Amit Shah said last year that he was a very chatur baniya, he had some truth in what he said. For once I will agree with Amit Shah. Also, people were asked not to serve in the British Army. Also, Gandhiji assured that Swaraj would be achieved in a year if the movement was continued to completion. Now let us look into how the movement was withdrawn. So in 1922, an unfortunate incident happened in Chauri Chaura, where the few protesters, they burned a police station in which few policemen were burnt alive. And Gandhiji, therefore, he withdrew the movement and he said that we are not yet ready for the movement. And he is criticized by many young people, very nationalists, that why did he do that? But as I told that he was a very shrewd man, he knew that if the movement will turn into violence, then it will make things very easier for the British, because they know that if the movement will become violent, the British will get the excuse to completely persecute the Indians, or completely, with use of iron and stick, completely subside the movement. Because as long as the movement is peaceful, the British cannot order to fire at the crowd, because the British were also very much careful of their international prestige. And therefore the Gandhiji knew that till the moment it will remain non-violent, the British would not be able to do anything, and they would be at the back foot. But if the movement will turn into violent, it will take a single day for British to allow or to order fire on the people, and that would cause a lot of damage to lives and property in India. So he was very, he knew, he had full control, or he knew the sense of the masses. And secondly, by 1922, the movement was showing the signs of a fatigue, because you cannot, I mean, you can boycott if somebody is doing some business, you can boycott, you can do this, you can hit the streets for 1 week, 2 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, but you cannot stay at the street for 2 years. You have to earn, you have to, also feed your children. So naturally, any movement after few months or few years, it will show signs of fatigue. People will, the kind of support the people that movement was getting, it started declining, and therefore Gandhiji thought that it's an opportunity for honorable withdrawal from the movement. Because if the movement will die a natural death, that will make the British more happy, and that will send the message to British that, Gandhi and the movement is a failure. But with this issue, it provided opportunity to Gandhiji to have an honorable exit from the movement. Now let's understand, or let's have the significance of this movement. So it was the first first grace mass movement, and it widened the social base of Indian national movement. Secondly, fear of European rule was erased from the minds and hearts of people, because till that, before the movement, the people thought they are Lak Sahibs, they are someone which we should be scared of. But when they went to the streets, it ultimately made them fearless. It thought that the idea of European domination somehow got diluted with this movement, and the people realized that they could not do anything if we will protest peacefully. Thirdly, it triggered many women liberation movement. So for the first time, lot of women joined the movement. So because at that time the life of women was considered to be only inside the room. But when she went and hit the roads, it also gave boost to the women reform movements. Fourthly, there was some lot of positives. There was complete communal harmony between Hindu Muslim during the movement, never to be achieved again in other two movements which happened in 30s and 40s. Also, it established the popularity of Congress party among the people. Also, it led Gandhiji to be leader, or it established Gandhiji as the leader of the masses. However, it failed to achieve its dream of achievement of Swaraj. Now let's look into another important thing, which is which are the sections which participated in the movement, and which areas participated, and which are the objectives which were achieved by the movement. Because here a question could be asked that non-cooperation movement, or there could be a statement like this section participated heavily in non-cooperation movement. So therefore this is very important, this section is very important. Just listen to my words very carefully. So the middle class participation in the movement was not very spectacular, and this could be revealed by the fact that school and court boycotts were less. They were very less. Less lawyers have boycotted the court, and very less students have boycotted the school and college. Secondly, the boycott of elections was successful, which could be seen from the fact that except in Madras council elections, everywhere else the voting was less than 5%. So election boycott was successful. Thirdly, number of Gandhian social movements were also successful, because anti-liquor or anti-liquor campaign saw a significant drop in the liquor revenue realized from Punjab, Madras, Bihar and Orissa. Because Gandhi's social mass movement involved both political aspects and social aspects. Fourthly, economic boycott was very successful, which could be seen from the fact that the imports of European goods declined by half during this period. Also, the small traders and businessmen, they supported the movement with open heart, but the rich capitalist class, they were either neutral or they were pro government. So we have to differentiate between the small businessmen and traders and the large capitalists. The small traders and business, because their interests were aligned with the policies of the movement, because this policy promoted self-good, self-reliance, which meant that more and more people would buy from them, from their shops. But rich capitalists, they don't want to alienate the government, because they thought they are getting all the concessions from the government. Therefore, they were pro-British or they were neutral. Next is non-cooperation movement witnessed participation in areas which were never, or where we never saw any active participation in any protest against the British. So we saw that areas like, or there was peasants who participated in Rajasthan, Sindh, Gujarat, Awadh, Assam, Maharashtra. In South India, except Karnataka, there was significant participation from Andhra Pradesh, Kerala and Tamil Nadu. Also, most of the scheduled caste or among the scheduled castes, Dalits, there was significant participation from Maharashtra and AP, while a lot of tribals from Andhra Pradesh and Bengal, they also participated in the movement. Also, a lot of working class. There was also involvement of working class in the movement. And the involvement of working class could be seen from from following incidents like the labor unrest in Madras, the strike in Bengal, the strike in tea gardens in Assam, the strike in Bengal railways. In Ahmedabad, there were one strike every month. So the strike reflects the increasing participation of the working class in the movement. Also, the peasants, they also supported the movement with a very great enthusiasm, and therefore in Kheda, the Patidars, they have started no revenue campaign without the formal approval of the Congress. In Awadh, the peasants started no revenue campaign. Also in other places like Punjab, Kumayu, Garhwal, the participation of peasants was significant. They refused to pay rent because for them, Swaraj meant a utopian concept where they would have to pay no rent and no tax to anybody else. So therefore, they demanded Gandhiji Raj against the Baniya Raj. Now let's look into the non-cooperation movement and Khilafat equation. So, Khilafat movement, even though it achieved the short goal of bringing the Muslims into the national mainstream, it somehow increased the use of religion in politics. And ironically, it was Jinnah who opposed the use of religion in politics during the non-cooperation movement. He believed that politics and religion should be separate, or they should be kept separate. And there were appeals on grounds that if you are a Muslim, you should not deal in the army. A lot of religious slogans were used. Also, after in Turkey, when Mustafa Kemal Pasha, who was the army officer in Turkey, when he revolted against the caliph and he abolished the institution of caliph, then the one issue on which this movement was based, that issue got over, and therefore there was lack of enthusiasm among the Muslims with time. Also, many of these leaders of Khilafat movement, they started to have differences with Gandhiji because they adopted this non-cooperation and this non-violent only for their convenience, only to get support of Gandhiji. They did not actually believed in that. So they kind of realized when this Mustafa Kemal Pasha did the revolt in Turkey, they realized that angering or anguishing British would not serve them any purpose. Therefore, they started preaching, or they again started preaching loyalty towards the British imperialism. They thought that this would be more beneficial to the Muslims in the long run. After the withdrawal of non-cooperation movement, the Congress was divided into two groups, and they were pro-changers and no changers. So pro-changers wanted to get back to the old or the pre-non-cooperation movement politics of Congress, which was to join the legislature and to expose the true nature or hollowness of the 1999 Act, and to pressurize the government to enact more pro-masses act. So the leader of these no changers, or sorry, the leaders of these pro changers were Motilal Nehru, C.R. Das, etc. While the leaders of the no changers group were Nehru, Jawaharlal Nehru. Actually, the father and son differed with each other many times. Nehru did not want him. Jawaharlal Nehru was young and he was more radical, while Motilal Nehru was more moderate. Patel and Rajendra Prasad. So these no changers wanted to go back to the constructive program. They thought that returning back to constitutionalism would be betrayal of what we did in last 2-3 years, where we use all non-constitutional means to oppose the British. So the British were hoping that, like Surat split, again a split would happen in the Congress, and naturally Congress would weaken again. But Gandhiji, again being a very shrewd man, he brought into, or he tried to make a compromise among these two groups, and he said that I personally support no changer, but those who believe in going to legislature, he said that they are also nationalists of highest order, and Congress would support them. So therefore, the people who were believed in pro changers, they formed a Swaraj party within the Congress. So Swaraj party is what you call as the election wing of the Congress. So C.R. Das was the president of this Swaraj party, and Motilal Nehru was the secretary of this Swaraj party. Other prominent leaders of this party was N.C. Kelkar, Hussain Shahid Suharwardi, and Bose. So what were the objectives of this Swaraj party? So it wanted to attain dominion status for India. It wanted to establish control over the bureaucracy. It wanted to obtain full provincial autonomy, attaining Swaraj, obtaining the right to frame a constitution, organizing industrial and agricultural labor, controlling the local and municipal bodies, having an agency for propaganda outside the country, engaging in the constructive program of the Congress. So finally, in the elections, the Swaraj party won 42 seats out of 104 in the Central Legislative Assembly. And the main program of the party was to obstruct the government, to create deadlocks on every measure. So therefore, they boycotted all the official functions and receptions held by the government. So there was some significance of this Swaraj party. So let's look into the significance or what you call achievements. Firstly, they elected their own person as the Speaker of the Central Legislative Assembly, Vittal Bhai Patel. Secondly, they outvoted the government many times, even in the matters related to budgetary grants. Thirdly, they were able to defeat the Public Safety Bill in 1929. They also exposed the weaknesses of the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. and they gave fiery speeches in the assembly on self-rule and civil liberty. So during the process, during the years when there was not many street activities in the or organized by the INC, they came or they provided this space in the vacuum period. Now, what are the weaknesses of the movement? So they could not coordinate their struggle inside the assembly with the mass freedom struggle outside. They became, and they also totally relied on newspapers to carry on their work and message in the assembly, which means that they forgot to hit the streets. They became too much embedded in that privilege they were getting. They thought, I mean, they again went back to these moderates whose job was, or who thought that if they will give some of these fiery speeches, or if they will write a very anti-government article in the newspaper, that will do the job. Right? That was their mistake. They thought that that will do the job, but that did not do the job. Secondly, some of them could not resist the perks of power. So therefore, Motilal Nehru was a member of Scheme Committee and A. Ramaswamy Iyengar became member of the Public Accounts Committee. Also, the policy of obstructionism has its limitation and flaws. You cannot obstruct the government at every time. It can achieve its purpose only for 1 or 2 years. Also, C.R. Das died in 1925, which further weakened the movement. Also, there was internal division which developed between the Swarajis. So there were group called as responsibilists. So there was division between Congress, and there were further division between Swarajis. So there were people like responsibilists, and there were people like non-responsibilists. So it included people like Madan Mohan Malviya, Lala Lajpat Rai, and Kelkar. While non-responsibilists included Motilal Nehru, and Motilal Nehru withdrew from the legislature in 1926. They did not wanted any kind of cooperation with the government. So finally, in 1926, due to lack of unity among the leaders, the party did badly in 1926 elections, and therefore, finally, the party merged with the Congress in 1930. When Gandhiji gave call for civil disobedience. Now, second thing which the Congress did during this phase, so many of the congressmen went to the electoral politics, they joined this legislature. There was other group of congressmen led by Gandhiji who believed in constructing work, who believed in involving the masses in the struggle, who believed in deepening the organization of Congress. So they used number of methods during this period. So they used to educate the upper caste about the evils of untouchability. They also worked towards organizing, or they worked among the outcasts. They tried to educate them. Night schools were organized for adults. They condemned the Hali system. So Hali system was a system where there was hereditary labor of lower caste who would serve the upper caste landowner. They also used tribal dialects. They composed tribal literature and music. They also led the movements like Bardoli movement. So what was the achievement of these constructive programs? So these constructive programs meant that the mass base of Congress increased. Tribals and untouchables joined the movement. It therefore gave moral strength to the movement, and it also provided grassroots leadership to the movement. Next we have is Simon Commission. So Simon Commission, what happened was that in 19, usually the Montagu-Chelmsford Act said that after 10 years, a commission would be appointed to look into the constitutional matter and to evaluate how the MC reforms have worked. So in 1928, the government in Britain, which was led by Conservative Party, they knew that they will get defeated next year in the elections, and Labour Party would come to power, and they knew that Labour Party they do not have experience of running the government, therefore they can do anything which can adversely affect the Britain's control over India. Therefore, in advance they appointed the commission called as Simon Commission, and 7 MPs from Britain was sent to India in 1928 to study constitutional reforms and make recommendations to the government. The problem with this Simon Commission was that there was no Indian in that commission. And Indian nationalists took that as an insult, because how could a commission which wants to decide the future of India should have no Indians? There should be no Indian opinion which will, I mean, the people in Britain, they hardly knew about India. They came straight away from Britain. How will they decide our fate? Therefore, protest movement started going on against the commission, and wherever it went, there were signs of protest which the nationalists organized against the commission. So the Congress party decided to boycott the commission. Muslim League and Jinnah also boycotted the commission. Hindu Mahasabha also boycotted the commission. The Justice Party in South India, they decided to side with the government on the issue. So wherever they went, there were chants of Simon go back everywhere, and Lala Lajpat Rai also organized demonstration against this, and he was brutally hit by the Britishers, and that led to his death. And that's the reason why Bhagat Singh and group murdered Saunders, because they considered him to be responsible for his death. The British responded to this protest brutally. Even leaders like Nehru was brutally beaten by the policemen. There was lathi charge organized against the top leaders. And let us now understand the recommendations of the commission, because a question could be asked on that. So it recommended that diarchy in the provinces should be abolished, and ministers should be made responsible to the provincial legislature in all departments. So in 1999 Act established the concept of diarchy, where there will be some subjects which will be reserved for the governor and his council, and some were transferred to the Indian ministers. So this system worked very bad. When we'll discuss constitutional development, we will discuss that. And therefore it recommended abolition of diarchy at the province. It also said that the franchise was to be extended and legislature should be enlarged. So it recommended extension of franchise and enlargement of legislature. It recommended Federal Assembly should be constituted on the basis of representation of provinces and other areas as per population. It recommended no change in the central executive. It also said that the All India Federation was not considered a practical idea. Also, it recommended that Burma should be separated from British India, because till that time Burma was only separate from India after 1935. Before that, Burma was all the Governor General of India was also the Governor General of Burma. Now let's move to the Nehru report. So when Indian nationalists were opposing the Simon Commission, the Secretary of the State for India, Lord Birkenhead, had given a challenge to Indians that okay, you are protesting the Simon Commission, that there are no Indians in that. So okay, I give you a challenge that you frame your own constitution, which is acceptable to all group of Indians and all political parties. So this challenge was thrown, and therefore Congress naturally accepted the challenge, and all party meeting was called, and in all party meeting a committee was appointed by that after that meeting, which was headed by Motilal Nehru. And it was given the task of drafting draft constitution for India. So this committee was headed by Motilal Nehru. Jawaharlal Nehru was its secretary. Other members were Ali Imam, Tej Bahadur Sapru, Shoaib Qureshi, Subhash Chandra Bose, and G.R. Pradhan. So draft constitution was prepared by the committee, which was called as Nehru report. So this was submitted at the Lucknow session of all party conference in 1928. So what does this recommended? It recommended dominion status for India. So many of these members like Jawaharlal Nehru and Bose, they opposed this dominion status because they wanted complete independence from India, but then they were convinced by these moderate. Secondly, it enshrined fundamental rights for Indians, which includes right to vote for men and women above the age of 21. So it enshrined fundamental rights for India. It also proposed universal adult franchise. Everyone who is above the age of 21 will be entitled to vote. There would be no property and other criteria. Also, there would be no state religion. Also, there will be no separate electorate for any community, but there will be reservation of seats for the minority community. So there will be reservation of seats for Muslims at the center and in province where they were in minority. Remember the words. It proposed that there will be reservation of seats for Muslims in all the states where they are in minority, but not in provinces where they are in majority. It also recommended a federal form of government where the residuary power will be with the center. It also, or a proposal was for the creation of Supreme Court. Also, it recommended that province would be created on linguistic lines. And lastly, the language of the country would be Indian, which will be written in either Devanagari or Telugu or Tamil or Kannada or Bengali. That will be decided later. So this was the recommendations of the Nehru Committee report. But later, many Muslim leaders met Motilal Nehru at Delhi, and they suggested few proposals, and these proposals were accepted by the Congress at its Madras session. So these proposals were called as Delhi proposals, because Muslim leaders met Motilal Nehru at Delhi and suggested or recommended these proposals. So these Delhi proposals were, firstly, 1/3 representation of Muslims in the central legislature. Secondly, formation of 3 new provinces with Muslim majority, and these were Sindh, Balochistan and Northwest Frontier Province. So after this proposal was accepted, Hindu Mahasabha was opposed, because they opposed the formation of new provinces on religious lines. But the Congress told them that, see, we have also kind of made the Muslim League and Muslim parties accept joint electorate. So it's a compromise where all will have to give something. After this, after this, in 1928, all these political parties met in Calcutta to discuss the report, and Jinnah made 3 amendments to the report. So he demanded that 1/3 representation of Muslims at the central legislature, which was accepted by the Congress. Second thing it demanded was that there should also be reservation of Muslims in states where they are in majority. And thirdly, he demanded that residual powers in the should be vested with the states and not the center. And since these demands were not accepted by the Congress, he gave his 14 points in 1929, and he withdrew his approval to the Nehru report. So his 14 points would include federal constitution with residual power with the provinces, provincial autonomy, no constitutional agreement without the agreement of the states, all legislature and elected bodies to have adequate Muslim representation, adequate Muslim representation of Muslims in the services and in self-governing bodies, 1/3 representation of Muslims in central legislature, 1/3 in state and central cabinets, separate electorates, no bill to be passed in any legislature if 3/4 of the minority community considered it against his interest. Also, any reorganization of territories should not affect the Muslim majority in Bengal, Punjab, and Northwest Frontier Province. Separation of Sindh from Bombay Presidency. Full freedom for all communities, and protection of religious, cultural, educational, and language rights of the Muslims. This is not so important, but you should know what he was talking about. And ultimately, Lord Birkenhead's statement was truth. The Indians could not unite on one single platform, and that gave boost to the British. Let's move to the next event, which was the Delhi Manifesto. So after this, the British thought that if they will not appease Indians, or not Indians, basically the Congress, they would again launch a mass movement which would create destability in India. Therefore, to appease Indians, Lord Irwin called for round table conference to discuss the future of India. So many prominent leaders, national leaders, met with Lord Irwin, and they issued the manifesto, and they sent that manifesto to Lord Irwin for acceptance. And there were three demands in this manifesto. First was that the purpose of roundtable conference should be to formalize or to formulate a scheme for implementation of dominion status. Secondly, Congress should have a majority representative or majority representation at the conference. And thirdly, amnesty and general policy of conciliation. Viceroy Irwin rejected these demands, and therefore the next step which the government took was the Lahore session. So Lahore session was called for after the Irwin rejected the demands of the Delhi Manifesto. So first of all, in this Lahore Congress, the Congress announced boycott of a round table conference. Secondly, for the first time, it demanded complete independence or Purna Swaraj as the aim of the Congress party. Nehru was the president of this Lahore Congress. Also, the Congress Working Committee authorized to launch a program of civil disobedience, including non-payment of taxes, and all members of legislature were asked to resign their seats. So it instructed Congress to launch civil disobedience movement. Also, January the 26th, 1930 was fixed as the first Independence Day to be celebrated every year. So after this Lahore Congress, Gandhiji, as you know, he always wanted to give opportunity, because he thought these mass movements should be measure of last year. I mean, after all the opportunities of discussion and negotiation are exhausted, only then Gandhiji used to launch these mass movements. So he gave another last opportunity to the British to accept the demands of Gandhiji, so that this movement could be averted. And these demands included 11 points agenda, which Gandhiji met after meeting Irwin, demanded from him. And these 11 demands contained something for everybody. So 6 were the issues of general interest. So they include reduction of military and civil service expenditure, total prohibition, discharge of political prisoners not convicted of murder, reform of CID and its popular control, and amendment to the Arms Act. 3 of them were the pro-business demands. They include re-evaluation of Indian or INR or the rupees, protective tariffs, and reservation of coastal shipping for Indians, and two of them were the demands of the peasants. These includes 50% reduction in land revenue, abolition of salt tax, and government monopoly on salt. So since salt was the universal issue, it's an emotional issue with an universal appeal. Therefore, Gandhiji launched the movement with the salt satyagraha. So these 11 demands had everything, something for everybody, and this is the reason why in this movement almost all sections of the society supported the movement, right? So after Irwin refused to accept this demand, Gandhiji finally launched the movement, and the movement was launched with the Dandi March. And what really happened in Dandi March? It was 78 members of Gandhiji's ashram in Sabarmati. They walked and they went to Dandi, which was 240 miles far. And there they broke the salt law, they make salt themselves, and finally they were arrested. So Gandhiji further gave following direction, because Gandhiji knew that he could be arrested any time. So he gave further directions to the people so that this movement could be a success. So he ordered people that wherever possible, civil disobedience of salt law should be started. Secondly, he recommended that foreign liquor and cloth shop should be picketed. Thirdly, he gave the appeal to refuse to pay tax. People should refuse to pay tax. Fourthly, he said that lawyers should give a practice. Also, the public should boycott the law courts by refraining from litigations. Sixthly, he advised the government servants to resign from the post. Seventhly, he advised that truth and non-violence should be maintained at each and every cost, even if the British tried to instigate us, even at that cost also, truth and non-violence should be maintained. So let us look into the spread of the movement. This is very important. Spread, and what are the strategies adopted in different parts of India. So, in Northwest Frontier Province, the movement was led by Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, or what we call as Frontier Gandhi, and he organized his Khudai Khidmatgars, who led protest. And one significant event happened that the Garhwali soldiers refused to fight, or refused to shoot, or refused to fire on non-violent protesters. This meant that the feeling of nationalism started to touch the army also. In UP, the peasant movements become inseparable from the civil disobedience movement, and no rent campaign became part of this movement, and therefore Prabhat Fairies, Magic Lantern, and peasant meetings became the main method. So in UP, no rent campaign was organized. So in UPSC, they could ask, in the exam, they could ask a question, which method was organized in which place in India. So they could ask you anti-chowkidari, but they could give you match the followings, that these are the 4 methods used in this movement, and match it with the place. So no rent campaign was organized in UP. In Gujarat, salt satyagraha and no rent campaign was organized. In MP, Maharashtra and Karnataka, anti-forest law, salt satyagraha, was organized. Also, there was a strike of the workers in Sholapur. In Nagpur also there was participation of workers. It was great. Also, there was strike in the Grand Indian Peninsular Railways and in the docks. So in MP, Maharashtra and Karnataka, there was anti-forest law campaign and strikes of workers. In East India, anti-Chaukidari tax campaign, and which was organized in Bihar, and anti-municipality tax which was organized in which was organized in Bengal. Also, Assam organized the anti-Cunningham circular campaign. So this was actually all the students will have to, all the parents have to give, or they have to sign a bond which would ensure that their students would not be involved in any anti-British activities. So this was started in, or this law was began in Assam. There was anti-municipality tax in Bengal and anti-Chaukidari tax in Bihar. In Nagaland, Rani Gaidinilu, she also launched the mass movement, or what you call a revolt against the British rule. In South India, flag agitation was launched, where the flag was, Indian flag was waved, or it was waved in the, over the top of the government buildings. When we talk of economic impact, so the European import, it declined by half. But the Great Depression of 1929 also had an important role for this, for this reduction in imports. Also, there was significant increase in women's participation in this movement. In case of untouchables, except in Nagpur and Berar, which were strongholds of Ambedkar, the civil disobedience movement failed to enlist much support of the Dalits. Everywhere else, Dalits also participated. The Muslim participation was not as much as in the non-cooperation movement because of the call of by Muslim League of boycott. Very significant impact of this, or significant feature of this movement, was that for the first time the capitalists also supported the movement. While in non-cooperation movement, they did not support the movement. So because some of the demands of this CDM were pro-capitalist, and they realized that sooner or later Congress will come to power, and therefore they wanted, or they accepted, that without the backing of Congress, their demands would fall to deaf ear of the government. Now let's talk of the first roundtable conference. So when you talk of first roundtable conference, it was the first time or first ever conference between British and Indians as equal, but the Congress, since was involved in civil disobedience movement, and because its demands were not accepted, the demands which it presented in the Delhi manifesto, therefore Congress rejected the roundtable conference, and it was mostly attended by leaders of Muslim League, Hindu Mahasabha, the liberals and the princes. But they also told the British that without the involvement of Congress, this roundtable would be of no use, because they accepted that Congress is the dominant party in India. Ambedkar attended this electorate or this conference, and he demanded separate electorates for SC and ST. Now, in 1931, again, Gandhiji realized that the movement is showing a fatigue, and therefore, because Gandhiji's philosophy was struggle, then take a break, because he knows that the suffering capacity of the masses is limited. They cannot suffer for a long time. So after 1 year, when he was told that the government in Britain are showing some positive overturns to the Congress, he decided to meet Irwin with his set of demands. So therefore, Gandhi-Irwin Pact was signed. So it had following agreements. Firstly, there will be immediate release of all political prisoners who did not committed any violence. Secondly, return of all fines not yet collected, the remission of all fines not yet collected. The return of all land not yet confiscated, all land which are not sold to the third party. Also, there is the right to make own salt in coastal villages was allowed for personal consumption. Also, lenient treatment to those government servants who resigned. Right to peaceful and non-aggressive picketing, that was also given. However, two of the demands of Viceroy or two of the demands of Gandhiji was rejected. First was the public inquiry into the police excesses, and secondly, the commutation of sentences of Bhagat Singh and his comrades from death sentence to life imprisonment. So Gandhiji, on his behalf, he decided to suspend the civil disobedience movement, and secondly, he decided to participate in the next roundtable conference. So after this Irwin Pact, another movement which took place was the Karachi Congress in 1931. So as we know that by this time the working class movement and the peasant movement in India became strong, and this forced Congress to go little left. So in this Congress endorsed the Gandhi-Irwin Pact. Two resolutions were also adopted. One was on fundamental rights and second was on economic program. Next is the second Roundtable Conference and second civil disobedience movement. So Gandhiji went to England to attend the movement, but he returned to India disappointed because no agreement was reached on the demand of complete independence and on communal question. So therefore he came back to India and he resumed the civil disobedience movement. But this time the second phase did not got that much popularity because, as you know, that there was fatigue established with the masses. Third is the third Roundtable Conference, which took place in 1932, and since Congress was not participated in it, it was not of much significance. But in this Roundtable Conference, the British issued a white paper which became the basis for the enactment of Government of India Act 1935. In 1932, the British Prime Minister announced communal award, and this communal award was an expression of the British policy of divide and rule, and it recognized Muslims, Sikhs, Christians and Dalits as minorities, and it entitled them separate electorate. So firstly the separate electorate was only given to Muslims, later it was extended to Christians, Sikhs, Christians, and later to Dalits also. So Gandhiji was very disturbed with this award because he believed that if you treat Dalits as a separate entity, then his whole fight against abolition of untouchability would result into failure. Because he said if they would be treated separate from Hindus, then the Hindus will not fight for the removal of untouchability. Therefore, he met with Ambedkar, and he was in Giravada jail at that time, and he went to fast till death on this issue, and this forced Ambedkar, who was the biggest proponent of separate electorate, to visit Gandhi to convince him. Later, both of these leaders signed Pune Pact, and in this Pune Pact, Ambedkar agreed with the Gandhi's view of joint electorate, and in response, Gandhiji said that the seats which will be reserved for the untouchables, it will be increased from 71 to 147, which was 18% of the total seats. So Gandhiji said that you accept joint electorate, we give you more reservation which you wanted. More number of untouchables will reach the legislature. But please advise the British to allow Dalits to remain in joint electorate rather than to demand for separate electorate. So this ends the lecture for today. From tomorrow we'll try to end till 1947.